increased with the supermajority of the school board. Additionally, LB 891 provides the special building fund. School districts would be allowed a maximum levy of 10 cents. The maximum levy would only be increased to 15 cents with the supermajority of the school board. Both general fund and special building fund levies cannot exceed $1.05 without the vote of the people. This will provide a $750 million plus property tax relief package if passed. The documents I provided are model numbers that were provided by the Nebraska Department of Education and are projected calculations for each school district in Nebraska for years 1, 2, should LB 890 and 891 be passed in the legislature. Also, there's a one-pager that you probably have in front of you that provides a snapshot on the combination of what both bills do. And before I turn it over to questions and the proponents, this plan and this proposal, I want to thank everyone who's been engaged in this process. As you know, sitting here, it's not an easy task to, one, deal with property tax and do it in an equal way while providing equalization aid and significant property tax relief. This is not an indication or a slide on other people's bills that have been either debated on or up for the floor. I think we're all trying to get to the same point. It's just how we get there. To me, this is another version, what I view as sustainable long-term property tax relief. I think sometimes we get down here. I know I've been guilty of this, of thinking it's a one and done. I look at this as building upon a foundation. How it ties into the overall tax policy, I think complements what we're trying to do here, not only the income tax side, sales tax side, property tax. But I can tell you that a lot of Nebraskans, we've heard it in here, but even as I travel, they're frustrated with, one, the property tax, but two, the fairness issue when it comes to providing funding for education. And having the disconnect with 86 school districts that get something and 158 that don't, to me, that really is where, not all of it, but a lot of the urban rural issue resides, when property tax is the greatest burden, and the difference on where the sales and income tax goes here and then never coming back to the local areas, I think is where a lot of the issues can lie. So I hope to have a good discussion today. I'll maybe talk a little bit more on how this fits into the overall tax discussion as I see it. Obviously we can debate that. But I appreciate everyone that's going to come in on both sides of this. And again, I want to thank everybody that's been involved because this is a very complicated issue, but I think we're getting closer with each step. So again, I'll open up to questions at this time.
Thank you, Senator Pauls.
Thank you, Chair. You may have answered this or say you will be answering. Does this, what you're proposing, does it run parallel to what we're trying to do in other property tax relief, or is it in conflict with it?
So great question. It is in conflict. And I had the conversation with Senator Breezy. Obviously the bill that was 723 that we moved today, it would be in conflict with the sources of revenue needed to fund this proposal. In my portion, we carve off a 0.5 cent sales tax matching into the trust fund. And then we would take the 1107 credit and take a portion of that to fund the necessary dollars needed to provide the equalization aid over the next couple of years. As we phase this in, there's 29 school districts that would be held harmless in the first year, then it goes to 6, and then 2. We're dealing specifically in this case with the needs side of the TIOSA formula. But those, yes, it is in conflict with other provisions out there. And that's why I wanted to say that this isn't a slight on what Senator Breezy is trying to do or what anybody else has in store. But to make this work, there are a couple buckets of money that we'd have to go to, and that would be one of them.
Okay, because both of us voted for the bill this morning.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to vote anytime, and I think some of the senators who have been around, I'm going to vote for property tax relief every time. Because as this plays out, we're still early in session in the sense we're about 20% of the way through. There are a lot more hearings that we're going to have that fit into this bigger tax picture and puzzle. But from my principled standpoint of always supporting property tax relief, I'm going to vote for those things. We'll see how everything kind of plays out, and hopefully this gets, we'll see.
Okay, so in other words, it sounds like, I'm just trying to, because I'm
Sure,
trying to be as front as possible. There is a conflict, so there, if it does happen, both bills move on, you're willing to negotiate with the other people who disagree. Is what I'm.
Well, I'll always negotiate. I don't think both will be able to move on in
Well,
that
that's what
sense,
I mean.
right? So, but I've always been surprised down here when we may have a proposal and we think it might not go anywhere, but then we end up passing it. So there are other mechanisms and levers we can pull, but I don't, at this stage, this is what the proposal is. We'll see how everything plays out. But yes, I'm always open to negotiation.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your response.
Thank you, Senator Pauls. Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Chairwoman Linehan. So I haven't had a chance to probably look at these spreadsheets yet, but have you taken into account anywhere what the school districts look like in their loss of LB 1107 monies as is currently compared to what's happening here?
Yep. We have, and I think maybe some testifiers behind me can maybe dive in
Okay.
a little bit more on that. My understanding is that with the 25% that we're getting up to on the credit, we are not going to, in the first couple of years, we will not be able to reach that. And this is why what I'm trying to get at here, and the three things that stand out to me is one of the criteria was no tax increase. That's why we have to go to the funds that we're going to. Local control was important to me, and I think this achieves that. And then to the extent that we can provide equalization aid. And this is why when we talk about kind of the long-term, short-term, intermediate, long-term planning, where's the committee, where's the state, where are we going to build the foundation to the overall tax puzzle, if you will, to get us in a position to build off of a foundation. To me, when you look at school funding and how this ties into the income tax, into sales tax, because we're going to have discussions on income tax. All the studies over the years, all the conversations that we have in here are always to lower the rate, we have to broaden the base, which is the sales tax provisions. I don't think with this 1967 tax code that we have, if we're focused on this three-legged stool, to me, that's an outdated model of where we are in the economy. So if we're attempting to lower the income tax and provide property tax relief, that's putting more money in the pockets of Nebraskans. When we do that, that dollar can turn over in the economy 5 to 6 times. That money goes into the sales tax portion of how this fits into it. So I see this as a broader attempt to get us in a better standing from a foundation to build off of. And that's why I like this bill and prefer this bill. Again, it's simpler in my opinion. That not everybody necessarily knows about the credit that you can take. This is a direct shot into TIOSA that provides property tax relief, maybe not to the extent that the credit does at this stage, but I do think over time we can get and surpass what the credit might be at some point. So this is, to me, is not a one and done. Again, we're 49th on the state funding. We're in the low teens. Even in the region, this would get us up in the low 20%, but I don't see this as being done by any stretch of the imagination as to where we go. But I'm looking at this as the foundation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
First proponent. I don't know if I said in my opening, we go proponents, opponents, and neutral, but if I didn't, you all know that. Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Chip Kay. That's spelled ChipKay. I'm here to testify as an advocate for equitable funding of public schools in Nebraska, and I'm currently working as the Director of Finance and Human Resources for Columbus Public Schools. I support LB 891. Dr. Laufholtz and I would like to extend our thank you to the many senators sitting on this committee who graciously gave us their time to listen to the proposal that has become LB 890 and LB 891. As a sister bill to LB 890, Senator Lindstrom has designed LB 891 to be an effective, transparent, and sustainable way to ensure the necessary fiscal support of LB 890, but also to use it as an avenue to bring about property tax relief through equitable school funding. LB 891 sets the levy changes associated with LB 890, lowering the general fund levy to 95 cents from $1.05 and lowering the special building fund from 14 cents to 10. It keeps a combined levy limit of $1.05 while also acting separately. It also keeps current levy override statutes in place. Most importantly, LB 891 creates how the Education Stabilization Base Aid Reserve is funded without creating any new tax. This reserve is essential in funding the first component of LB 890, and creates a way to ensure sustainable fiscal support for the TIOSA model. You only need to look at examples like the Highway Trust and the Environmental Trust to know that this is a substantial component for education, LB 890 and LB 891. Nebraska Public Schools provide educational support for all students. At Columbus, we have a strong parochial school system, yet they can't do it alone. When public schools are funded, then the supports, programs, and partnerships we have in our communities benefit all students. LB 890 positively impacts 99% of the school districts and their communities, which is why it has received unprecedented support in the education community. LB 891 is the avenue to accomplish this goal. LB 891 shows the dedication of Senator Lindstrom to find answers and examine what impact can be made when investing in education. It results in multiple outcomes, including property tax relief. I would challenge those of you on the committee to work with Senator Lindstrom to make LB 891 a transformational bill for school funding and sustainable property tax relief. I would like to thank the committee for their time.
Thank you, Mr. Kay. Yes, Senator Breezy.
Thank you, Chairman Linehan, and thank you for being here today. Thank you for your work on this. You provided us with spreadsheets that show what happens in year 1 and year 2. So we see in year 2, we see a levy reduction from this injection of dollars. What would year 3 and year 4 look like? It's fairly similar to year 2?
I think with all things equal, the answer would be yes. It is obviously difficult to project into years 3 and 4. When we did year 3, assuming everything equal to year 2, 242 out of the 244 districts had increased state aid.
Okay. But there is a very disparate impact between districts on the impact of their property taxpayers. Would that be a fair assessment? Some property taxpayers in some districts would see a property tax decrease. Some property taxpayers in other districts would see an increase, and sometimes substantial.
So I'm not aware of anybody that would see an increase. I know there are 6 districts that would have to be held harmless, so it would be break even. I'm sorry.
Excuse me. We are talking about repurposing the entire refundable income tax credit, though, correct?
That is how I understand LB 891 to read. Yes, sir.
Which represents a 25% reduction in school property taxes paid.
Yeah, if I understand that, that's an income tax credit for 25% of the property taxes for schools.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Senator Flood. Thank you, Senator Breezy. I'm sorry, Senator Flood.
Thank you, Chair Linehan. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your work on this. I want to just call your attention to School District 59-2, which is Norfolk Public Schools. I see under year 1, they'd see a 33-cent levy reduction to about 67 cents rounded up. What authority would their, okay, so that's a prediction. What authority would the school board of Norfolk Public Schools have for a levy under the way your bill is written?
So each district has a calculated district specific maximum levy that's based on their total state and local spending authority. I believe the spreadsheet you're looking at, that should be the last number or the last column. So that would show their district specific maximum levy.
Okay, so I guess I was looking at year 1. It didn't have it on year 1, but we can look at year 2. So.
I apologize.
Oh, you're fine, you're fine. Oh, there it is. Sorry, yeah, you did have year 1 here.
The print's a little tiny.
Yes. Okay, so their maximum levy would be 95 cents, according to your spreadsheet there.
So, and I'll explain how that works. It's a great question. So if you look around, you're going to see some districts that have less than 95 cents. And so the district-specific maximum levy is based on a calculation of property taxes needed after state aid and other resources to reach that number. For some districts, that'll give them a district-specific maximum levy. Example for Columbus, I think we're around 81 cents. Norfolk, if it calculates higher than 95, we go to the lid of 95 cents. So there are districts that had a calculated specific levy of higher than 95. So we dropped it to 95. That would be the case in Norfolk.
So here would be my concern, and it had nothing to do with any of your math or anything. It's a policy question. if right now Norfolk Public Schools have $1.05, and included within that is the special building fund levy right now, isn't that correct?
Mhm.
Okay, so is the special building fund levy outside of this 68 cents that they have here? Under this new bill?
So under the new bill, the 68 cents is just general fund. And so then
there's the Special
they,
building fund on top of that.
correct.
So the special building fund is what, 12 cents or I can't remember?
So it will be 10 cents in this proposal,
Okay.
maximum.
So really they're at probably 78 cents by the time you add it up. Why, is there any way you could limit then Norfolk Public Schools to 78 cents so that I could be sure with the cap on that it falls? Because I think my support for this is really tied to the ability to know that it is property tax relief. Because the worst case scenario for me is we could put all this money into it, and then you could have a local governing board, making local decisions that say, well, we're gonna need the 95 cents plus the state money. And in essence, we have a lot more spending. Now, I'm not saying Norfolk Public Schools would ever do anything like that. In fact, I'm pretty confident they wouldn't. But what is your policy answer for that concern?
Okay, so I
That's
appreciate.
not a trick question.
Nope, I think that's a very straightforward and a very honest question. I appreciate it, Senator Flood. So one thing about this, the district-specific maximum levy is it is based on the formula. And so with 244 different districts, you have 244 different stories. That's valuation, that's needs, et cetera, et cetera. So that district-specific maximum levy is a way to control that levy setting. In other words, that should be a calculation. Now, in this case, Norfolk is a district where it says they would need 68 cents dollar for dollar, and they could go up to 95. I think that would be, a substantial explanation on Norfolk's part to have to do that. I'm confident districts will, and local school boards will continue to be very conscious of what they tax taxpayers. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, we've not changed the spending limitation. So at 68 cents, that's dollar for dollar. Well, if they're already reached their spending limitation this year, well, they can't get to 95. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion about districts, we don't have spending limitations in LB 890 or LB 891. And I'm willing to present to the committee Nebraska statute 13-500s and the lid computation form that shows how spending lids are calculated already. So keep in mind, and I think I will go ahead and present that to the committee. How about if I keep a copy so I actually know what I'm talking about? Thank you. And I present this to the committee because I think one of the concerns about that you have, Senator Flood, is one that everybody would have. 68 cents is great. There's property tax savings. Will they go to 95? What's keeping them from going to 95? And really what it comes down to is the LC2 form, which is the lid computation form, is going to calculate total allowable budget authority. And then when you submit a budget, you have the adjusted general fund that cannot exceed. Therefore, the other part that's going to regulate that 68 cents, besides a district-specific maximum levy, which is new to this bill, Norfolk doesn't have that. They've got the 95, but the lid computation form is really going to limit what a district can ask. The next question would be, well, Chip, you're telling me that's a spending limitation. You're not telling me it's a taxing limitation. I would refer you to page 2, which in the green circle is the most allowable cash reserves a school district can have on hand. If school districts overtax their patrons, they would be building up cash reserves. We're also capped on our cash reserve amount. So between levy lids, district-specific maximum lids, a lid computation on spending and budgeting, there's also a percentage cap on cash reserves. So I would take the approach that there's plenty of things in place with LB 890 and already in statute chapter 13 to ensure that they can't take that 68 to 95.
Well, I would just close by saying thank you very much for presenting a thoughtful approach to the problem. It's nice to talk about solutions.
Thank you, Senator Flood.
Thank you, Senator Flood. Other questions from the committee? Senator Friesen?
Thank you, Chairman Linehan. So when I've looked through this, and I do appreciate people finally started to work on some projects and show some solutions. When we first met was in Columbus, and since then I know you've made changes. And when I had Farm Bureau look at the numbers, and because they analyze things, I've always depended upon them. We ended up sending some suggestions to you, and are you amenable to accepting any of those recommendations going back? And my concern is I look at some schools here and they get a 2 or a 4 cent levy decrease. And they're schools not necessarily in my district. I think my district probably comes out pretty well in this. But out in the Sand Hills and some of the small schools out there, a 2 or 4 cent levy decrease and yet losing their 1107 money, it looks to me like they go backwards. And yet we've not really addressed they have a high cost there because they have 8 kids in a classroom. How do we help those schools? Because I think they deserve some state aid also. And this doesn't appear to me yet to be getting there.
So Senator Friesen, I would say, first of all, thank you for the number of times you did sit and listen and provide some input to us. I know Jack Moles from NERCSA is going to get up and testify today, and NERCSA presented a proposal and testimony yesterday that Senator Walz's office is looking at the data, which would include a percentage of base funding, which I know is the Farm Bureau suggestion. That percentage may or may not be applied. I think it's all about running the data right now before doing anything else.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Other questions from the committee? I have just a couple. How much spending authority does Norfolk have now that banks or that they could access?
I do not know their unused budget authority, Senator Linehan.
I think it'd be helpful for the committee if we had schools, the number of schools and their unused budget authority that they already have available to them.
Okay, I will ask Bryce Wilson if I can get that information.
And then what in this bill, the other thing, because one of the reasons we're here today is we've talked about for ever since Senator Lindstrom has been in the legislature. Problem was valuation increases. 2009 homeowners, commercial property kind of froze for a while, but ag properties went up. So now we're back to high oil prices and ag prices are going to go up again. And homes are going up like crazy. So, okay, we lower the levies, but what are we doing about valuations?
That's a great question, Senator Linehan. And because valuation is not addressed in TIOSA, nor is it set or controlled by a school district, we chose not to have anything that would muddy that water in LB 890 or 891 by adding controls on valuation. I admire the legislature for addressing that. That probably needs to be someplace else in statute.
So there's nothing in the bill that protects us from 10 and 20, 30% increase in valuations, which multiplied by a levy that's 25, even if it's 25% less, still means taxes are going to go up.
No, Senator, there's not, because it's not currently in TIOSA right now. So we tried to stay within the scope of TIOSA.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, any other questions? Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Senator Linehan.
Next proponent.
I always trip on this chair.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chairwoman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Dr. Troy Loffelholz, and that is spelled TROYLOEFFELHOLZ. I come here to testify as Superintendent of Columbus Public Schools. I feel it's our purpose and responsibility to advocate not only for Columbus Public Schools, but for all Nebraska public schools, their staff, and their students. Therefore, today, again, I'm in support of LB 891. According to the Nebraska Constitution, the legislature shall provide for the free instruction in the common schools of this state of all persons between the ages of 5 and 21 years. To meet this obligation, the legislature has established taxes to provide funding. The legislature said only local funding can use property tax to fund schools and other local subdivisions. In 1990, the legislature adopted LB 1059, the Tax Equity and Educational Opportunities Support Act, referred to as TIOSA. A couple of intent bullet points of the legislature set out specific objectives back in 1990 to be achieved through the new school finance system. 45% of the general fund operating expenditures of school districts, reduce the reliance on property tax, broaden financial state income tax for support of the system, assure each district a foundation support level for the operation of schools, assure a greater level of equity of educational opportunities for students in all districts, assure a greater level of equity in property tax rates for the support of the public school system, and assure that there's a shift to sustainable revenue resources other than property taxes. We feel that LB 891 works towards each of these bullet points addressed in 1990. All of these have been bullet points the legislature has struggled to accomplish in the past 30 years. LB 891 reestablishes a dedicated 20% of all income tax receipts and creates sustainable revenue sources in ESBA to assure stabilization funding and state support for schools. In a quick recap of the LB 890 hearing, the conversation kept circling back to LB 1107 and its funding. I'd offer that when thinking about funding property tax relief, the legislative body should think about diversifying its portfolio. Like all other personal investment portfolios, we don't put all of our money in one fund in fear of sustainability. The same conversation can be made in regards to LB 1107 and LB 891 and any other property tax relief mechanism. LB 1107 is an income tax reduction and not directly related to property tax relief. Maybe there is an answer to lowering property taxes on the front end and a rebate on the back end. I've had conversations with members of my family who farm up north of Kearney, and the only thing they remember is writing the upfront check for property taxes and not the refund. ESBA and the allocated income tax helps all districts meet each of the school district's diverse needs. ESBA and the allocated income tax equates to over $700 million in property tax relief. This levy room allows flexibility and works as a way to address things like addressing teacher salaries and growing student populations in districts. This works for all school districts and still allows for local control. Some have asked for the ability to secure 20% base funding for all districts. This could establish upfront 20% in property tax relief. Again, working on diversifying the portfolio could mean much more if done right. LB 891 is a viable solution as it stands. This package of bills does address school tax levies and property tax reduction. There could be other avenues to reach the same result through amendments and other funds, again, to diversify the portfolio. And thank you for allowing me to come in and talk about LB 891.
Thank you. Other questions from the committee? Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Chairwoman Linehan. I'm going to go back a little bit further, talk about some of the things we've visited about in the past. And, you know, when we've looked at school funding and you highlight the fact that the state's supposed to provide for the free instruction of our kids. And so I've got schools that I look at, they get 0.2% of their budget comes from the state currently. And other schools get up to 60% of their budget comes from state aid. There are schools that collect more in state aid than they even collect in property taxes. And how are we narrowing that gap between state funding between the schools with 0.5% and those with 58 and 60? Are we bringing that gap closer together by doing this?
I think what you'll find in the spreadsheets that you've been given, when you look to fund 244 school districts with 244 different needs, it's hard, and we've talked about that several times. I think you'll see a lot of examples in there where you see tax levies come closer together from that standpoint. I know we've talked about Utica, Centennial, and York, and you can talk about Norfolk and Pierce and Battle Creek. You can talk about Columbus, Lakeview, and other areas where you see the tax levies come closer together. The hard part about that is when you start looking at each individual district, you look at their needs and their student population. And again, there's no easy answer, and that's why we talked about the 20%. Maybe that's half of what Farm Bureau's asking, but at the same time, I think it also helps in some of those smaller communities.
I think part of that discrepancy comes though as the levy discrepancy I can account for in a way because of what happened to ag land values versus housing values. And so these bills really do nothing to take care of that discrepancy yet because we've got ag land yet that's has seen a 200% increase. And even though we have a hot housing market, we've probably only seen a 20-30% increase in that residential market so far. We may see more, but right now with that huge shift, the reason those levies are so low in some of those districts, all of that burden was shoved off onto ag land. And it's not really the levy discrepancy, it's the taxes somebody pays versus somebody else. So
That is correct.
that's where I'm kind of coming
And
from.
I think that goes back to Senator Linehan's question to Mr. Kay, the valuation. And that's something that we don't control as a school district. That's a county-based decision. And I know there have been bills to limit that valuation growth and what that looks like. When you control that valuation, you're also going to put in really some unforeseen controls when you start talking about tax levies as well, because obviously the more control you put on the valuation, reducing that valuation, you're going to increase the tax levies in some of those smaller communities as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator
You're welcome.
Friesen. Other questions from the committee? I have one.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
don't, on your third paragraph of your
Mhm.
testimony here, it's according to Nebraska Constitution, and then you have a quote. I think we're missing a quote at the end of that, but then
Oh.
the third line down, to meet this obligation, the legislature has established taxes to provide funding. The legislature said only local funding can use property tax to fund schools. I don't quite because
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I don't understand that statement.
Okay, so I'm glad you pointed that out because as I was rewriting testimony this afternoon, I probably left something out, so I
Okay.
apologize. So this goes back to what Senator Lindstrom talked about in the 1967 tax code. And so when you talk about the Constitution, so in 1966, the state stopped collecting property taxes.
But the people did it, not the legislature. It was on the
Correct.
ballot. right?
Correct, that
Okay.
is correct. Okay, and so the legislature said only local funding can use property tax to fund schools and other local subdivisions. And that came out of that change in 1967. Only the legislature only local funding can come to fund schools and other local subdivisions.
So this is just, but other local subdivisions, other than schools, they can use sales tax too.
Yes.
Okay. There's other taxes besides property taxes, but anyway, okay,
Right.
never mind.
And I can send to you the full paragraph
Okay,
if that's okay.
yeah, that would be helpful. All right.
Absolutely.
Other questions? Thank you very much for being
Thank you
here.
very much.
It was so much fun, I'm back.
Me too.
So I apologize that you have to listen to me again.
That's
So,
okay. Well,
good afternoon, Senator Linehan, members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Ginger Meyer, spelled Gingermeyer. I come here to testify as superintendent of Chadron Public Schools. I am here today in support of LB 891, the sister bill to 890. Chadron Public Schools shares a unique story. We are a rural district with a current enrollment of 925 kids K through 12. Our district is at the 105 lid levy between our general and building fund. 40% of our land is in public, state, or federal lands, meaning not all of our land is taxable. Some of the public land pays a little bit of a tax, but we do have a state and federal lands that do not. Our district does receive state aid, and that we are grateful for. We are a frugal district. 2 of our buildings turned 100 this year, and our newest bus is a 2004. With enrollment growing, we need more teaching staff that we will be hard pressed to hire under current budget. It is difficult to hire teachers in our part of the state. We are going to have to keep current and competitive to get educators to Chadron. Current revenue restrictions, over-reliance on property tax, and the burden of providing the necessary resource for our students are capped out. And even if we could squeeze another penny, it would fall back on the limited tax base. LB 891 and LB 890 would be that lifeline for our school and for our taxpayers. LB 891, as currently written, would significantly reduce our general fund levy. With this model, both our school and our taxpayers benefit greatly. Our current general levy fund is $1. Under the proposal, it will be 64 cents. That is a levy reduction in our general fund of 36 cents, so 36%. Our state aid increase would be that of $2.1 million. We do have a max general fund levy of 95 cents, but with our spending and budget authority, we could only go up to 76 cents total. Our education community and other diverse groups have come together on this bill. I have been in education for 28 years, and this is probably the first time I have seen something like that. Nebraska currently finances over 70% of the costs of operating its public school system from property tax and local sources, while nationally only 43% of the costs are supported by property taxes and other local sources. The over-reliance on property tax for the support of public school systems has resulted in great disparities in local property tax. For example, this is my second year at Shadron. I was at a smaller school, Scribner-Snyder, 2 years ago. I can levy as much at the $1.05 that we levied at Scribner for the same amount of money at 70 cents, because we are land poor and they were land rich. Funding public schools in the state of Nebraska is no easy task. One size does not fit all when trying to fund 244 separate districts, each with their own unique needs and stories. The intention of the bill is to be simple, transparent, and equitable. There are two valuable outcomes: a structurally sound and sustainable school funding model, and a substantial reduction in the reliance on property taxes to fund public schools. The introduced LB 890 and 891 has an estimated 50-50 split statewide between local property taxes and state funding. I do ask if 891 cannot be your answer. If I would hope that the committee would work with Senator Lindstrom to figure out how to fund 890. Thank you.
Are there questions from the committee? Were you in part of the conversations about the 20% basic funding?
Yes, and I'm the president of NERCSA this year, and
Okay.
I do agree with that, because I think all schools need something. So if we could write into the bill that, everybody gets at least the 20%, then everybody would see some benefit.
So how big is Shed? I think you told me this yesterday, but I'm sorry, I don't recall. How many students do you have?
We have 925 K-12, and if you add our 4-year-olds and early childhood kids, that's 80 more.
So you're a NERCSA school, but one of the bigger ones.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it.
thank you.
Hello, my name is Grant Norgard, Grantnorgaard. I am the superintendent for McCook Public Schools, and one thing I want to say is I started my career teaching at Battle Creek Elementary School as a 5th, 6th grade teacher. And Ginger, she taught next door to me, and we had no idea each other. We're both going to be here today. So I just wanted to point that out. Go Battle Creek and go Shadron and McCook. I want to thank all Chairwoman Linehan, thank you very much, and committee members, I appreciate this opportunity to come and speak before you. I'm also very thankful to Mr. Chip Kay and Troy Loffelholz, Senator Walz, and Senator Lindstrom for bringing forth legislation that I believe is really quite creative and quite thoughtful. And I think it's something that we've really needed in the state of Nebraska. I've always felt a little bit guilty that schools were not necessarily the ones bringing forth solutions to solve the property tax issue in our state. And I really appreciate the work that they've done. McCook Public Schools, a little bit about who we are. McCook Public Schools is an equalized school district. We're a Class B school district in Southwest Nebraska. It's a community of about 7,700 residents. Our district is made up of agricultural, commercial, and residential property. We run about 6 bus routes. Most of those, 5 of those are outside of the community itself. And we have approximately 1,400 students, give or take, depending on the year. And there's a small our pre-K-8 parochial school in our community as well. Where they come over to the public schools at 9th grade. And they do an outstanding job. Currently, McCook property owners pay about 99 cents towards our general fund levy, and they pay about 5.5 cents towards our special building fund. This gets us right to the $1.05. During my 13 years in McCook, it's a great place, and they've kept me around, so I appreciate that. Thank you, McCook. 13 years there, we've been most of the time at that $1.05 levy. Most of the time, actually, it's been just for the general fund. There was about 3 years we were able to get down to the mid-90s. And this would have been about 6 years ago. We were able to get down that low. And then quickly, we had to raise that back up to $1.05 as we saw state aid dollars go away. During that time, we had to make some painful decisions concerning staffing. We had to do some reductions in force. And of course, when you do that, you also have some reductions in programs. And that all happened within the last decade. One of the things that I also want to share with you today, that during that same period of time, McCook Public Schools has maintained a relatively low cost of cost per pupil based on average daily attendance. I don't know if I clarified that yesterday for LB 890, but we're at $1.05 and we spend about $12,643 a year per student. And that places us about the 11th lowest cost per pupil in the state of Nebraska. Now, the reason I share that, I know every school has unique conditions they have to deal with. You can't just compare student cost to student cost, but being 11th lowest and being at $1.05, we're not living lavishly. That's why I bring that up. So even though we're at $1.05, we've cut programs within the last decade. We don't have family consumer science at this point in time. We don't have automotive classes. A lot of Class B schools do. We've cut foreign languages. We've had to reduce our media specialists. And so I want you to be aware of that. One of the things that we see with this bill is a benefit to our taxpayers, and it's a benefit to the tune of about $2.7 million. And of course, like Shattern, McCook Public Schools has a higher percentage rate than other property tax relief bills. One other thing I wanted to point out is McCook Public Schools is a school district that shares boundaries with schools with lower levies. If you are on Highway 83, for example, and you live on the west side of Highway 83, you're going to pay about 26 more cents than a property owner on the east side of Highway 83. And sometimes that's the same property owner. And let's be honest, it doesn't always even have to be a highway that is that dividing line. It could just be a property line or a fence line. So I want you to be aware of that as well. And they're able to run their school district successfully with some of those programs that I mentioned we've had to cut. Elements of this bill helps significantly reduce tax burden property owners in McCook Public Schools, 30 to 40 cents, depending on which year you're looking at. McCook residents have had to deal with high levels for years. This bill provides hope of a tangible relief. The benefits to property taxpayers and schools brought about by the passage of Bill 9 are positive. I'll just end there.
Thank you. Is it Dr. Nokard?
No, it's Mr. Sorry.
Mr. Nokard. Are there questions from the committee?
You can call me doctor.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
It's fine. Okay, seeing no questions. Thank you
All
very
right,
much.
thank you. Appreciate it.
Good afternoon, Senators. My name is Dave Welsh, Davewelsch. I'm a farmer and currently serve as president of the School Board of Milford Public Schools. I have served as a school board member for over 30 years. I'm here to testify in support of LB 891 and 890. For over 5 years, education and ag groups across the state have been working together to try and come up with a formula to distribute additional state aid to schools. It has been a difficult task. Different pieces to the puzzle have been introduced over the years, but none of them have made it to the finish line. So the default position of these groups has been to support putting additional money into the property tax credit fund and more recently into the LB 1107 income tax credit for school property taxes paid. Many across the state have considered these two funds as placeholders until a better TIOSA formula could be created. LB 890 and 891 provide that improved TIOSA formula to increase state aid to all schools and to provide direct property tax relief all across the state. LB 891 is an improvement over 1107 income tax credit because it provides direct and transparent property tax relief. 1107 monies require schools to basically borrow money from our property owners, and then the property owner has to request an income tax credit 6 to 12 months later. Why would we want to do that? LB 891 allows property owners to keep their money in their own pockets. Last year, 1107 provided a 6% income tax credit on school taxes paid. If LB 890 and 91 had been approved last year, these two bills would have provided more property tax relief to every property owner across the state than the 6% credit did, especially when you take into account that 60% of the 1107 money was not claimed last year, or that's all that was claimed was 60%. If the 1107 money is reallocated to TIOSA, it will provide direct property tax relief. There's one area I would suggest for improvement on basically 890. Originally, LB 890 did not include an averaging adjustment for schools for those above 900 students. The current plan as introduced does. Under the current state aid formula, the averaging adjustment provides $29.4 million to 20 larger schools in our state. I would suggest that to improve LB 890, that there should be a minimum basic funding of 20% to all schools. This would provide additional funding to 88 smaller schools across the state at a cost of approximately $18 million. This basic funding calculation would take place after all of the other calculations within LB 890. This seems to be a reasonable compromise to provide needed additional funding to both large and small schools across the state. The attached graph that was handed out provides a clear visual aid in showing how these bills bring levies down and closer together, which for those of you that have been on that committee, you've heard me say that multiple times over the last few years. 70% of the schools will have levies in the 50s and 60s range. So I'm asking you to please support these bills to provide increased state funding to schools and to provide direct and transparent property tax relief. I'd also like to thank Chip and Troy, and especially Senator Walz, Senator Lindstrom for introducing these bills, and also for Senator Coulterman for signing on to them right away. Just as I was sitting back there, I've got maybe a minute or less here, but I really appreciate Senator Breezy trying to lock in the $548 million under the 1107 money. I mean, that does provide property tax relief, and it provides it in a percentage, so the higher levy schools get more money returned to them than the lower levy schools. So I think that's appropriate. Just one thought, with LB 890 kicking in about $727 million of property tax relief, maybe the number doesn't need to stay at 548 million. Maybe the percentage needs to be locked in at 25%. By throwing or putting another 727 million through 890, 25% that's $182 million. Maybe we don't need that 182 million in 1107. That could help fund 890. Maybe the two packages could work together in some way. So
Thank you.
just throwing that out there. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Senator Breezy.
Thank you, Chairwoman Linehan. Thanks for coming here today, Mr. Welch.
Sure.
So far, I've heard people testifying from a school that's going to get whose taxpayers are going to get maybe a 42% reduction, a 36% reduction, a 44% reduction, a 40% reduction in their levy, but they're also going to give up a 25% property tax decrease because of they'd be giving up 1107. Who I haven't heard from today is, say, somebody from Elgin who's going to get a 2% reduction in their levy. I think about 4%, actually 4 or 5. And their taxpayers, to get that 4 or 5% reduction, are going to give up 25% property tax relief in the LB 1107 credit. And so
Right.
what do we, now you mentioned basic funding, 20% basic funding. Will that get to Elgin?
I don't have all those numbers in front of me. I've got a nice spreadsheet at home with about 20 tabs on it right now. So if you'd like me to share that with you, I would,
Well,
but,
that's all right, but you
but-
say it'll get to about 80 schools, so we're still going to miss a whole lot of schools with basic funding. And so I worry about schools like that. What do we tell them on a program like this?
yeah, that's just the way legislation works down here. Unfortunately, not everyone can become a win-win on this deal. Like I said, if this would have been enacted a year ago, everybody would have been saying, oh boy, I got 6%. And none of us imagined that 1107 would jump to $548 million in the second year of it. I mean, we thought it was going to take several years to even get up to 350 or whatever the so-called ceiling or floor was at that time. So yeah, it's happened for 1 year. Whether or not that's sustainable could be a question, but it's like getting a piece of candy. Once you get the first one, you don't want to let it go. You want to keep it coming. So yeah, that's a challenge. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Other questions from the committee? Why wasn't the 20% basic funding included in the proposal? I mean, it's not very much. I mean, we're talking about 700 and how much million? $740 million in basic funding is 18 million and it couldn't be included?
I don't know. It might have been when I approached those that were drafting this, I was considering replacing the ESPA line item with a basic funding number. They indicated that they'd moved quite a ways in their equation on this, and they felt that putting 20% or whatever percentage in that part of the equation didn't create the equality or fairness or whatever definition you want to put on it there. I think now that the plan has moved forward, it's been drafted, and we can, we've got the NDE model. We can see who it helps more, who it helps less. I mean, if you want to bring everybody's levies down, obviously you have to send more money to the high levy districts, which I think this bill does a pretty good job on that. There's a few left behind. But I think now that the model's complete, if you look at who still isn't up to a 20% of their basic funding and you tack that on at the end, I think that's an appropriate place. And like I said, you get 88 more schools, especially the 6 hold harmless schools. 5 of those would receive about a 6 to 10 cent additional levy reduction. So I think it does have an impact. And the other 80 some schools, it varies significantly from less than a penny to, probably over a dime.
And you're an ag producer, right?
Yes.
So are you concerned at all that we're not touching valuations on this?
I've offered that as a suggestion for over 5 years and nobody's jumped on it yet.
Oh, there are
So
some people jumped on it.
let's say we jumped on it, but it didn't get across the finish line.
That's true.
That's one of my extra notes here. If I had more time, is to suggest that, but I understand the political hurdle that would have to overcome. But yes, we've never addressed the doubling of ag land valuations in Nebraska, the impact that it's had on state aid to our schools. And I think with LB 890, that would be a good addition, in my opinion. You would bring more rural schools into equalization. And I haven't crunched the numbers. My little spreadsheet doesn't have the ability to do that, but I think it's worth considering. And whether we do it this year along with 890 or it's something that gets added later, I don't know. So.
Thank you very much for being here. Are there other questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
Next proponent.
Good afternoon, Senator Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Jack Moles. That's JACK MOLES. I'm the Executive Director of the Nebraska Rural Community Schools Association. NERCS appreciates Senator Lindstrom's willingness to introduce LB 891. And on behalf of NERCSA, I wish to testify in support of 891. We especially support the philosophy of getting more state funding to public schools, the result of which would lead to lower property tax requests. It is NERCSA's hope that the Revenue Committee can find a way to commit state resources to make it possible to fully fund LB 890. It would be our preference, however, that you not dip into LB 1107 funds, if at all possible. Property owners in many NERCSA-sized districts would not fare as well in LB 890 as they currently do under LB 1107. In the hearing on LB 890 yesterday, I made a suggestion, as did Mr. Welch, you heard earlier, that would guarantee that every district be assured of receiving at least 20% of its basic needs. This would help to close the gap between 809 and 1107, somewhat. In looking at this, by the way, this idea partially came from Senator Friesen, his ideas on looking at basic funding. Not using 1107, of course, would involve finding a different source of funding if possible. NERCSA would be willing to be involved in that discussion. No matter what you do to support LB 890, a dedicated source of funding that is sustainable would be expected. LB 890 would not be workable without the necessary funding. We believe that LB 890 has a great potential to provide strong state support for public education, thus providing sustainable property tax reductions. We very much appreciate Senator Lindstrom's desire to help lead the discussion on LB 891 and to be part of the 890 and 891 vision. We encourage you to move LB 891 forward, but to consider all angles of funding as you do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Malls, other questions from the committee? Senator Boster.
Thank you, Chair Linehan. You said that the 20% base funding would somewhat help address the gap. Can you tell me where would it not help the most, and how much would that be?
You know, I don't have those numbers for you, but we have 80-some districts right now that would fall below 20% of their basic needs in the formula as it currently is, the 890 formula. By bringing it up to 20%, you're going to see more property tax reduction made possible. That's where it would close the gap. Almost all of these are smaller districts that aren't able to lower their levies as much.
So, I mean, I understand. So if a district's getting 25% from 1107 and they're getting nothing out of the formula, but we add 20%, am I missing anything to then think that we'd be left with a 5% gap?
Well, it depends on the district. We have some districts that would receive like 5 to 6% of their basic funding through 890. There's a few of them that are 19 point something percent. One, I think I looked at, it was under $1,000 it would take to get them to 20%. There are a few that are over 400,000 to get them to 20%. Those districts, of course, would fare better than that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Boster. Senator Pauls.
Thank you. You're the second individual I heard about the 20%. So that is intriguing me, because to be honest with you, the person who's before you have always been impressed with the deep thinking that goes into a lot of the suggestions. The 20% though, if that was guaranteed, you would say that was a good thing.
Absolutely. If that was guaranteed in 890, yes, that would be a very good.
Would that take away some of your apprehensions about 1107?
Yes, it would. It would help to close that gap, is what I'm saying. So yes, it would help to alleviate some of it.
Is it possible that 1107, that is in a bubble? I've heard on the floor, people said that, can we sustain that? I don't know if we can or not, and I'm asking what if. But 20% would be into the formula.
I don't have an answer for you. You know, as Mr. Welch said earlier, the 1107 money, we didn't foresee where it'd be today.
I think exactly.
Will it be there next week or next year? Will it be there the year after?
Well, then that could be where the bubble.
Right.
is. Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Pauls. Senator Reason.
Chair Linehan, thank you for being here today, Mr. Moles. But even with the 20% basic funding, we're still going to have some taxpayers going backwards when they give up a 25 to 26% reduction in school property taxes if we have to give up 1107. That'd be correct.
If you were able to maintain it at 25%, I think you'd probably be right.
Okay,
If you're able to maintain it at that.
sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Any other questions from the committee? Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for being here. Appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Josh Fields, Joshfields, and I'm the current superintendent of Seward Public Schools. I'm also representing not only Seward Public Schools today, but also Stance, Nebraska Council of School Administrators. Schools taking action for Nebraska Children's Education, Stance, is comprised of 19 mid-sized school districts, free of lobbyists, that's why you see me here today, that represent over 25,000 school children. Stance is unique in the fact that we have districts representing the entire state from Chadron to Blair. Levies that range from $1.05 to 60 cents, and enrollments ranging from 863 students to 3,928 students. We are representative of Nebraska education. We don't take lightly our positions with the legislature. We submit this testimony in support of LB 891 proposed by Senator Lindstrom. We appreciate Senator Lindstrom's bringing LB 891 and Senator Wall's sister Bill 890 yesterday. Both senators' willingness to work with all stakeholders, listen to concerns, take feedback, and bring forward these bills is not going unnoticed. This could be one of the biggest pieces of legislation to provide property tax relief that has support from educational community, school boards, and taxpayers with meaningful tax relief. This bill as written will provide property tax for all 19 of our districts within the Stance organization. In year one, LB 891, Stance district's constituents would see a tax savings of $54,596,203. In year two, Stance schools constituents will see a tax savings of $80,481,992. This is meaningful tax relief for all taxpayers within our communities. Through the funding of the half-cent sales tax and state matching funds placed in the trust fund, this bill would not require any new taxes. The max general fund levy at 95 cents the first year, then going down the second year, already sets in place spending limits on school districts and keeps the needs of each district in the hands of the locally elected school boards statewide. Spending growth at statewide is 3%, while student growth has increased by 8.6%. LB 891 provide more equitable state funding across the state of Nebraska and would change the narrative that we hear every year from the Nebraskans about over-reliance on property taxes. Through this bill, the state-local balance of funding education moved from 48th to the 13th to 19th. Stance schools currently have 28% funding from the state and 72% from local funding. Under this new plan, we would see this move to that 50-50, which is ironically how that turned out with our Stance schools, and you look at all 19 of them. Stance continues to be dedicated in helping in any way possible to have sustainable property tax relief that still ensures we're able to continue to provide excellent education to our students. We believe that LB 891 does this, and we appreciate all the work of Senator Lindstrom for bringing this bill forward. Thank you again for allowing me to testify today.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. Fields? Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Chairwoman Linehan. So I do appreciate your one goal here, and that's 50% of the funding from state, 50% from local. Do you think we should try to achieve that for every school?
I do, but I don't know if it's possible. I think it would be, just looking at ours, even with ours, so I know you're at Aurora, correct? And so looking at Aurora right now, we've got 18% that's funded local or by the state and 82%, and Seward's the same way as Aurora. Our concern would be, and we changed those so it would go up to 32%, which would be great, but I don't know if we have the dollars to get to that 50% for Seward and Aurora would be my point.
We have some schools receive probably 54% of theirs from the state.
Correct.
I mean, so you would say it should be a long-term goal to get to 50-50?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Other questions from the committee? So I'm just going to ask you because I think I know the answer. But in your fifth bullet point, the maximum general fund levy at 95 already exists in place of spending limits. Okay, but but the maximum levy is still $1.05, right? Because you had the 10 cents building fund on top of that.
Correct, yes. But I was talking about the maximum would be with the new would be 95. Correct.
But the 10 cents goes on top of that.
Correct, yeah,
So it's still $1.05.
yes, yeah.
So I think the concern, maybe it's, nobody's bringing it up here, but so I'm going to talk about it. We have 548 million now that goes to your taxpayers, all our taxpayers. Doesn't matter if you're $1.05, Stance, GNSA, goes to everybody. And it's 25%. I don't know how you get clearer than that. 25% of what you pay, you're going to get back.
So we've, and these are rough numbers too. So because you asked that question a lot yesterday, and so we tried to look at that. And so for Stance schools, it does come out with this new bill, we'd get a better percentage of property tax relief to our taxpayers. Now, we've got some schools like Lakeview that'd be very, very close to where maybe just be a break-even piece. And so when we look at those differences, that's what we found with our Stance schools. But I know it's been mentioned before, there's going to be some districts like Elgin that may not have that same that same piece.
Right, so it's good for Stance overall.
Yeah.
But what we're really, here's kind of what kept coming up over the last 4 years when we've been going through this, is that schools don't trust the legislature. We heard it again and again. But now you're asking us to trust the schools not to go to their maximum levy.
I would say that if you'd have if you attended our school board members and our school board,
And it's not just Seward.
Yeah.
You're asking us to trust every school in the state not to go to their maximum levy.
we are. But I think it's also in this bill, we're asking that hopefully that we can find the dollars to fund schools too. And that's like you said, it's,
Well, out of the
Piece two.
714 million, the bill finds 548 million of it.
yeah.
It's 1107.
Mhm.
So again, it's just the ironies here, Nobody could trust us, but now we're supposed to trust 244 school districts and their school boards. Other questions from the committee? Thank you very much for being here.
You bet.
At least you're not from Shadron. It's not that far to Seward.
That is absolutely right.
It's my first time at revenue. We'll see if I come back, huh? Chairwoman Linehan and the Revenue Committee, my name is Stacy Higgins. Stacy, S-T-A-C-I-E, Higgins, H-I-G-G-I-N-S. I'm currently serving as the past president of the Nebraska Association of School Boards, and I am a member of the Nebraska City Public Schools Board of Education. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you in support of LD 891 on behalf of the Nebraska Association of School Boards and Nebraska City Public Schools. Nebraska's 1,700 locally elected volunteer school board members serve important roles in our districts and communities. First, we're tasked with providing high-quality education to all students in our districts. Second, we have the fiduciary responsibility to our taxpayers, making sure that financial resources are allocated wisely. We, along with our partners in education, have long advocated for more state support to provide an excellent public education. Our members do see the direct correlation between increased aid and reduced property taxes. New calculated lower levies will ensure property tax relief. We also support keeping the existing spending controls in place as they have kept statewide operation spending growth to 3% while enrollment grew by 8.6%, and support the additional levy cap to give taxpayers assurances that this will result in real tax relief. Our 9-member board at Nebraska City was elected by the same voters who elected the county commissioners and the city council, with the understanding that we would all be good stewards of the budgets. We make decisions knowing this responsibility, and as today's op-ed in the Journal Star stated, we also know that our local public will let our locally elected officials know if they made unwise financial decisions. We recognize that schools play an important role in Nebraska City, and all 531 of Nebraska's communities is a place of opportunity, of community pride. Each student gets access to a quality education regardless of their ethnicity, their socioeconomic status, or circumstances. Nebraska City Public Schools, which has an enrollment of about 1,400 students, is at the $5 levy, and it has been for 13 years. This allows little levy authority to generate funds to address the changing needs of our student demographic. Our student population is above the state average in special education, English language learners, free and reduced lunch, and student mobility. We are proud of the opportunity we have to educate all students. However, there is an unfair burden on our taxpayers by requiring us to be at the levy limit to fund operations. We believe that passing LB 891 along with LB 890 or some form of sustainable funding is an important step in recognizing the responsibility that the state of Nebraska bears in quality education for all students. These bills remove a portion of the burden from the local property taxpayer to other sources of state funding, such as income and sales taxes, an important step in creating a closer balance of property sales and income taxes. In conclusion, let me reassure you that Nebraska's publicly elected school board volunteers are committed to the future of Nebraska and a quality public education for all. We believe these are steps in that direction. Please join us in supporting LB 891, which recognizes the importance of state funding for public education. Thank you.
Are there questions from the committee? Senator Breezy.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you for your testimony here today. The Association of School Boards represents all school boards across the state.
We do.
And
Well,
you-
all member districts, which is almost all of them except a few
Very,
outliers.
very good. And how do you determine what bills to support or oppose or?
Great question. We have our board of directors and then we have a legislation committee, and that legislation committee is made up of representatives from all the legislative districts, elected school board members that then represent those legislative districts. And so during session on Monday morning, we have that call and we go through the bills and we discuss. And that's just what we did with this bill. This one, of course, took a lot of discussion. It's been a long time since we came to a conclusion that we're going to be for something. And then our board of directors also had that same conversation.
That kind of goes to my next question. The decision wasn't unanimous, I take it.
It was, we didn't do a voice vote. It was a discussion. It was not unanimous. We know that this is not best case scenario for every member district, but our membership had a really healthy conversation about this is something that does impact in a positive way so many districts. And so there was that sense of best for the larger cause.
What was the split? Any guess?
No, I don't have a guess. I was on the call in my car and didn't have the screen.
Okay,
So,
very good. Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Other questions from the committee? I have a couple. What's the free and reduced lunch rate in Nebraska City?
Last time we were able to measure it, pre it being
Pandemic.
free, was 52%.
Okay, and how it, in your second paragraph, because I've seen this in 2 or 3, and I brought it up before, but second to last line, the second paragraph, statewide operations spending growth to 3%. Yesterday, and everything I've seen up to today, it said over the last 11 years. I don't know why that slipped out of the,
Yes, I guess I don't know either. I can,
because it's, I
yesterday's,
understand where we get to 3% in 11 years, but we
Okay.
can't just say 3% because that wouldn't be.
okay.
And then, and obviously, Nebraska City had, you've had some special issues, haven't you?
We have. We had a failed levy override in May of 21.
So right now you're having to use your $5 for some building stuff?
Right now, we're using our $5 to survive. Our staff, by attrition, we have reduced staff quite a bit. We're putting Band-Aids on a lot of building projects. We were able to have some ESSER dollars help with some HVAC, but we have to cash flow all that. So it's hard to tap into that when we don't have cash in hand.
So is part of your $5 a building fund
Yes, but outside of the $5, we have a general obligation
bond?
bond and QC Puff.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. for being here.
have numbers for you, Senator Linehan.
That's good.
Senator Linehan, members of the Revenue Committee, my name's Kyle Fairburn. I represent the Greater Nebraska Schools Association, GNSA. Organization has 25 members of the largest school districts in the state. We represent about 75% of all the children in the state. Come to you today in support of.
I'm sorry. Kay says you have to spell your name.
Did I
even though
not
we
do
all
that,
know.
Kay? KYLEFAIRBAIRN. My apologies, Kay. Come today in support of LB 891. Just want to take a moment to thank Senator Lindstrom and his staff on this legislation. Over the past 3 months, I've watched the work put forward to bring this bill forward. Senator Lindstrom, working with Senator Walz, have worked tirelessly trying to put a package together to shape the change of school finance in the state. They have presented to public schools across the state, had meetings with outside organizations, one-on-one meetings with senators and public schools across the state. And they've taken those meetings and turned it into 2 bills, 890 and 891, that GNSA supports. Bills take a tremendous amount of time after watching these 2 bills come together. And that process is tough. And GNSA appreciates all the work that senators do bringing a bill forward because it's not easy. It has been said many times over the last few years in this legislature that the large schools that I represent in GNSA would never compromise on property tax issues and sending state money to rural schools. LB 891, along with its sister bill 890, does both of those things. GNSA is putting its trust in the legislature to fund this proposal in order to make sure that the children attending GNSA schools do not suffer from the loss of state aid. Trust has been a very tough issue over the years. As whenever the state needs to cut its general fund budget, it usually comes looking at TIOSA. Senator Lindstrom's bill is if followed, would build a trust to secure funding to ensure that cuts stay far away from schools that must depend on state aid to function. This trust will work very similar to the Highway Trust Fund and the Environmental Trust. GNSA would like another layer of protection in this bill, but no bill is perfect and we'll continue to work on that. Nebraska's also struggled with how to control property taxes. This bill would greatly reduce property taxes asking to all schools across the state. Property owners would see double-digit percentage reductions in property taxes in most situations. The National Center for Education Statistics, NCES website latest information shows that Nebraska is again 49th in the country in state aid support of schools. It is very difficult for schools that I serve who are dependent on TIOSA funding to educate all the children they serve to talk about changing the current formula. Senators Lindstrom and Walz have put together bills that most in GNSA support. GNSA hopes that senators will try to not to change these bills to eliminate the strong support from most of the public schools across the state. And Senator Linehan, yesterday you asked me the current level of funding in state aid for GNSA schools is about 1.2 billion. And again, that would be all local. So that's going to include some stuff outside of state aid. The new state
Outside of TIOSA.
Yes, outside of TIOSA. Yes,
Right.
yes, Senator. In the new formula, it'd be about 1.6 trillion. So billion. Yes, not trillion. Trillion would be good too.
You're not in
though. I'm not
DC.
complaining
We're
if
still
trillion
in
was the
Nebraska.
number. It's about a $486 million difference. Local funding currently is 1.3 billion. The new local would be about 830 million, again, which is about a $480 million reduction. So currently, GNSA schools, on average, about 47% of our funding comes from the state and 53% comes locally. In the new formula, about 66% would come from the state and 34% would come locally. Senator Merman had asked a question, why would this be good for schools or for property taxes? I looked at a school in Ralston, and again, I understand Senator Breezy's concern that some schools wouldn't see this relief. But under 1107, a property tax owner that had a $259,000 house at a levy limit of $1.05 pays $2,700 in property taxes. With the 25%, they'd get $681 back. Under year 2 of 890 and 891, that same property tax owner would save $1,112, almost double the amount from what they're getting currently under 1107. So I know that doesn't speak for every district in the state. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying that in Ralston, which would be very similar to a lot of the GNSA schools, you're going to see some very dramatic decreases in property taxes. And Senator Linehan, you asked that it's a trust issue. I'm sorry, am I out of time?
Somebody will ask you a question. Did I? Yeah, I did ask about a trust issue.
Yes. So, so Josh, you said schools will go right back up to their 95 cents
didn't
if they
say
can.
that.
Well, you said they have potential to.
Yes. I
Well,
did.
with the spending lids in place, that can't happen because they don't have they can't spend that cash because they're limited on their cash spending. So I just wanted to clarify that. Even if they wanted to, most schools would not be able to do that.
In GNSA.
In GNSA, that is correct. Yes, I can't speak for other schools, but in GNSA, that is a true fact.
Other questions, Senator Friesen?
Thank you, Chairman Linehan. We've known each other for a few years.
Wow, Senator, yes, sir.
So have you ever supported a property tax bill or a school funding bill that I've had in the last 7 years?
We have not, Senator. We have not. We've had a lot of good discussions about them, but we have never supported. No, we
Should
have
I
not.
be shocked when you're supporting a bill that gives you guys more money than it gives the rural schools again?
I wouldn't be shocked about that, Senator.
Is
But
there
we
a
did
path-
look for the money going to all schools, Senator, and again, 87 schools, I think, get TIOSA right now. That leaves a lot of schools out. The basic funding piece on this, every school gets something now.
You gave a nice example of a residential homeowner
Yes.
receiving a nice property tax break. And I would be willing to go back and look at the increases that they have seen in the past 10 years. And then we'll compare that to a rural school who's seen property tax values jump up and tax increases over 200%. And we'll compare how much a tax break they get.
Yeah, and again, in GNSA schools, Senator, those agricultural properties in those are going to see huge reductions. I mean, they're going to be in that 30-40% range.
Any of the $5 schools receive a
Right,
good property tax rate.
exactly.
And that's where 1107 money was kind of targeted to those who pay the most
Right.
versus valuation.
Yeah, so even those agricultural producers in GNSA schools would see dramatic differences.
Right. Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions from the committee? So just for the record here, on the part of your testimony, and this came up yesterday, so I'm sure the revenue committee gets the same information. All these NCES numbers don't include the new $548 million.
That's exactly right, Senator.
So that $548 million, when new numbers come out, if it's included in school funding, which should be, because it all goes to schools, that would bring us way up from 49.
It absolutely would, Senator.
And you said that now GNSA schools would be getting 66% of their funding from the state on average. How does that compare? That's much higher than most schools get from the state, isn't it, across the nation?
Across the nation, I don't know that, Senator.
Okay, well, we'll have to check that out. Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Chairman Linehan. Thanks for being here. Did you say that GNSA supports the 20% basic funding concept that's being thrown?
We
around?
have not even discussed that, Senator Breezy. That came up yesterday to me for the first time, so I can't address that right now. I'll have to talk to my committee.
What would your prediction be?
I would have to talk to my committee. I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you.
We're in a little different area here than I usually am, so I would have to talk to my committee, Senator.
Okay, any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next proponent? No more proponents? Opponents? Do we have any opponents? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Merlin Nielsen, MERLYN, and my residence is Seward. Besides being an ag landowner, I'm also a board member of Fair Nebraska, an organization that continues to pursue change in how we fund our schools. We appreciate Senator Lindstrom's leadership and joining with Senator Walz for bringing this bill and continuing the narrative of how Nebraska can modernize our K-12 school funding system and rely more on state collected tax dollars. I testified yesterday in the Education Committee hearing in a neutral position on the companion bill LB 890. That was because we support the portions of LB 890 that project all school districts, whether currently equalized or not, receiving some funding from the state. But we fail to see equity or balance across school districts in lowering property taxes, and the how to pay for it that we're discussing today is unacceptable. Today, I am here testifying as an opponent of LB 891, the proposed funding mechanism for the LB 890 concept. The part of the proposed funding in LB 891, taking the 1107 income tax credit for property tax paid on school levy, is simply not acceptable. I see way more to lose for folks in many rural school districts than what would be gained from some reduction in school property tax levy. Fair Nebraska remains committed to achieving a major change in how we fund K-12 education. Somehow we need to align taxation more closely to benefits received. Taxes paid should be commensurate to some degree with benefits that are received. I simply do not see that relationship in this bill. Thank you to Senator Linehan and the Revenue Committee member for letting me appear before you today and share my opposing position on LB 891.
Thank you. Are there questions from the committee? Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Chairwoman Linehan. So you said you were a landowner and it's not just in the Seward area, or where do you have land? What kind of school districts, type of school districts that are you part of?
We have some land in the Sand Hills, in the Sand Hills School District. That would be one that would be struggle to see the balance off of losing 1107 money in order to gain a reduction through the 891.
Have you come up with any numbers analyzing that yet, or?
I have not looked at that one specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Other questions from the committee? Senator Pauls.
Thank you, Chair. And I cannot go because I do not have all that knowledge, but when I hear about the 20% baseline, does that appeal to you at all? Or I don't know, if you've been around to hear that.
I've heard that yesterday and again today, but thank you, Senator Paul's excellent question. Would I support that? No, I'd support about an 80% basic funding from the state, and we would solve this property tax problem.
I know, but again, I'm
But
looking
yeah,
at the real world.
yeah, it sounds like something that should be clearly looked at. And certainly we've heard that from several of the education community. I appreciate their ability to look at that.
And I do love the Sand Hills.
I can't wait to get back out there. For some reason, I like it better than being right here with this wonderful view.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Next, apply. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chairman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Cheryl Logan, Cheryl, Logan, Logan. I'm the superintendent of the Omaha Public Schools. We continue to be a growing district that educates approximately 53,000 students. I appear before you today on behalf of myself and our Board of Education in opposition to LB 891. Of those 53,000 students, 10,338 receive special education services, 10,061 receive English language learners services, and in the past 2 months, we have received almost 100 students from Afghanistan. Our opposition is not something we take lightly. I had the opportunity, along with our legislative committee, to meet with Senator Walz and representatives of the Columbus Public Schools to discuss in detail the plan that is embodied in 890 and 891. We respect the efforts of Senators Lindstrom and Walz and very much appreciate being included in meetings and discussions seeking to make the plan better. First, at its heart, TIOSA is meant to be very simple. Need minus resources equals state aid. Districts with greater needs than resources receive state aid. Districts with fewer needs than resources don't receive state aid. The funding plan outlined in LB 890 and 891 proposes to fundamentally alter that simple premise. It introduces an old concept, basic aid or foundation aid, under a new name, Education Stabilization Base Aid. Our Board of Education has a long history of opposing efforts by school districts with more resources than needs to divert state aid from school districts with more needs than resources. That is exactly what LB 890 and 891 will do in the long term. LB 890 and 891 require massive amounts of tax revenue, which typically would go towards the general fund, to be directed to state aid to schools. The proponents of LB 890 and 891 argue that this will not shift resources away from schools with highest needs, because this will allocate $750 million in new spending to state aid. The bills in their current format propose to increase the allocated income tax percentage, as well as dedicating a half cent of sales tax to school funding. Interestingly, the increase in the allocated income tax percentage is ironic, given that when TIOSA was first adopted, the allocated income tax percentage was 20%. Today, the allocated income tax percentage is 2.23%. Neither the increase in the allocated income tax percentage or the dedicated sales tax are enough to cover the added costs of state aid. Where would the rest of the money come from? This plan actually creates greater unpredictability. And as we know, we got some news this morning to let us know about unpredictability and in terms of our tax base. Our district is currently funded at a rate of 50% by state aid. Under this plan, that percentage will increase to 71%. Even if this body were able to come up with the funds in year 1 or year 2, the legislature's long history of balancing the state budget by reworking TIOSA suggests such an approach is not sustainable. Since its inception in 1990, the legislature has changed the TIOSA formula almost every single session. To be fair, our esteemed chair pointed out to me yesterday during the 4 years that I have been here has not been changed. So I want to make sure that I point that out. Why would any school district rely on those promises, knowing the legislature could change them? 15 years ago, this body, as part of a settlement of a school funding suit, created the learning community to ensure that all districts across Douglas and Sarpy County had equitable access to resources. Since then, the legislature has systematically dismantled the learning community, and this legislation officially repeals the last vestiges of that settlement. We are understandably skeptical that the state will be able to maintain the funding levels. $711 million is a lot of money in 890 and 891 over the long term. Failure to maintain funding would be felt by the school districts with the greatest need. Second, as we look at the issues facing education across the state and our country, we are perplexed at the fact that we are dedicating time and resources to a discussion over whether to divert state aid to school districts with more resources than need. Most school districts are facing a number of troublesome realities. We are all experiencing all kinds of changes at this time. The education community statewide is facing record teacher and school employee workforce shortages. We are focused on keeping the doors open to our buildings and classroom staff so that we can keep our students in school. This is simply not one of the greatest priorities facing educating our Nebraska workforce right now. One final note, our Board of Education believes that this discussion is fundamentally one about local control. Boards of education are elected bodies who are responsible to their constituents. They are reminded regularly about things like teacher pay, safety and security, school supplies, curriculum, athletics, facilities, and yes, property taxes. Each district has the ability and the flexibility to make decisions as best serves the needs of citizens of that school. As someone who came to Nebraska from a school district in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, specifically Philadelphia, that did not control its own finances, I can tell you that is not a system. I fear that LB.
Dr. Logan.
Okay, on my time? Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Do we have questions for Dr. Logan? Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Chairwoman Linehan. Dr. Logan, I've visited with you before. We've been in some meetings together, and I've always impressed with how you kind of operated OPS. What is it that OPS needs to get to the point where they feel comfortable? Is it more funding? I've heard there's struggling school districts, and I think you've been working hard to fix that. But what is the solution? I mean, in rural Nebraska, we offer a basic education. There's not many choices. I think we offer a good education, but OPS, LPS, some of the larger schools obviously have some other issues. But how much money would it take to make you feel as though you should have every school a success in Omaha?
Well, I think that the basic premise of the question just goes all the way back to where children begin their journey. And all things equal, and children all had the same start where they have families that are highly engaged, I could answer that question. But I can't because I'm going to give you an example. When you have children that arrive from a war-torn country who have never even picked up a pencil, predicting the needs of those students is really difficult. And I know that in rural districts, you have the same issues that children move into your districts. You don't have the economies of scale that we have, that if a special education student, a student needing special services moves into your district and needs a nurse and a para, that it has a devastating effect on your budget. And so I don't know if I can answer, giving a number. I do know that we work really hard to be excellent stewards of the money, to not waste any money, and to provide the best education that we can for the students we have, many with really some pretty significant complex needs and varying levels of parent engagement, from parents that are highly engaged to parents that are not as available as we would like them to be. So I can't give you a number.
So does OPS ever weigh in on economic development issues? I know like Grand Island Public Schools weighed in on TIF financing at one point. And again, you talk about households and the struggle to get kids started. And so have they ever thought about coming to testify on some of those other issues? And I know it puts you in a predicament a little bit, but I would appreciate hearing your thoughts on that.
Did you see the breaking news earlier today, Senator Breezy?
I probably did not.
Okay, well, it's a really particularly sore subject at this hour. We had some pretty significant news this morning on a request that we can anticipate coming to us in the Omaha Public Schools. So I'm going to leave that to my Board of Education as the elected body.
Okay. I was just curious. So I know some schools have started weighing in on some of the issues once in a while that do affect them in indirect ways. So
I appreciate the question. I'll pass it along to our board.
thank you, Dr. Logan.
Sure, my pleasure.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Can you just give us a hint, because we were on the floor this morning?
There was a big announcement on this morning in reference to a large project downtown.
Yes, okay.
And
But that's still an OPS. It's all an OPS.
the
where they are
entire
now.
thing, the entire thing is an OPS.
And I suppose it's getting tipped.
We understand that is on the table.
That's the point you were trying to get to.
It was just a coincidence that he mentioned it, so.
Is there anything in your school district that's not tiffable? If
Um,
that's a verb?
If you think about TIF for blighted areas, I would say, yes, there's a large portion of our school district that I would not consider to be.
I know
blighted.
you wouldn't consider it, but all of
Uh-huh.
Exarban is tipped.
I understand that, and I am an observer.
Okay, thank you. I did have a question for you. Other questions? I'm sorry, Senator Pauls.
Yes, sir.
When you talk about TIF, having sat on the city council, I understand TIF. If this does happen, 15 years after that building is built, OPS is going to receive a significant amount of money, because First National Bank, that land, what it was worth before it was built, was like a few million. Now it's 50, 60, 70, 80 million. So you have to wait 15 years. I don't know if you'll be there or I will be here, but see, I think TIF has some pluses to it. But I
would not disagree. I would.
Right. Initially, I know, but it does have some effect on schools, especially like your system, which has a lot of tip.
Yes, sir.
The thing that I have a concern about is people do not view those of us who live in the Omaha area. They say we're getting away with it because they feel, and I'm not saying they're wrong, that so much of their property tax is going to schools. And even though you say needs, et cetera, that's not down here on the floor.
Yes.
So somehow something's got to be done. What would be your suggestion?
Well, I would say they're going to children, not to schools. Uh, And, sorry, but I mean, that's where it goes for me. It's going to children.
Right.
And the investment in our children, when we think about everything that is facing our state is the future, and I frequently, when I'm speaking to businesses and, talk about workforce shortage, I recently met with a large healthcare provider and shared with them that we have 15,000 kids in high school at any time. At any, and if you think about that number leaving in, over a 4-year period and going into the workforce and staying here in the state, many of our problems could be solved. When I shared with this particular organization that 150 of our kids, actually a few more, receive their CNA certification and can work as CNAs. Wow. I mean, we need those children, and I look at it. I wasn't trying to be a glib or smug, but I do really see it as the investment in our children, and I know you do too. So
Yeah. The thing about it, okay, I spent a lot of time in the metropolitan area, but at one time I taught at Atkinson, Nebraska. That town at that time, a number of years ago, was a Title I town because of the poverty. I don't think they're concerned about what's happening in Omaha. They're concerned about their little town and the people, and they're concerned about the property tax. I'm trying to put a balance here somewhere.
I think I've shared with Senator Friesen before that my mother grew up in Crawfordsville, Arkansas. The population was 653. So we spent our summers there. So a small town is not something that is a foreign to me, or very familiar with the challenges. Many of my family still lives there, and they do not. They have a lot of economic challenges there too. Senator Groney talks about the poverty in his town and some of the families' issues there, and they aren't particularly different. We're dealing with scale, right? But the needs of children don't change. I never see it as, and I've always found it curious when I came to Nebraska that it was rural versus urban, because I'm like, they're children. What difference does it make where they live? And I fundamentally believe that. And as the leader of the Omaha Public Schools, it doesn't matter where you live in the city. If you have need, there's needs all over our city. And our role is not to say, well, children in this section of the city need less. No, they have needs, and those needs need to be met regardless of where they live in our city. And I feel that way as a superintendent about rural and urban students. We need all of them to stay in the state of Nebraska and contribute. Our opposition to this bill has nothing to do with not wanting anybody to get anything. We want every child to get what he or she needs. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, Senator Pauls. Other questions, Senator Albright?
Thank you, Chair Linehan. And it's nice to meet you for
Likewise.
the very first time. I've never ever spoke to you before, but I am one of the rural schools in Nebraska. And it does very much concern me that their needs haven't been met for many, many, many years.
Yes, ma'am.
And so when I take a look at something of this magnitude and knowing in the last 6 years what this particular committee has been trying to do for the greater good of the state, whether it be the parents, the property tax payer, would you be in support of looking at those needs of the smaller surrounding schools? Because what I see when I look at these charts, the big get more and the others don't. I mean, to me, it's a bit of a tease. I just think that if we were to truly go out and audit the books of a lot of schools and find out where their money really is. I hear that the ESUs have a lot of money sitting in accounts that will help them build whatever they want to build. I mean, we hear stories from all different realms, from rural to the big cities and everything in between. So while I appreciate people bringing something to us to do a head start or just something to start looking at, because everyone who put this together and all the different people that were buying into this idea is well and good, but we are also trying on our end to take care of the whole state. You know, we're not the ones that are asking for the dollars, but we are the ones that are trying to manage to it. So knowing that it is all about the kids, it truly is. And I'll tell you right now, it's all about the teachers too.
Yes,
Because those teachers have a lot of reasons to want to go do something else for many, many reasons right now. So how do we collectively together work to an end? You're in opposition, but do you see, is there just one thing that you blatantly see that can be changed that would make a difference?
I believe that last year, I'm hesitant to answer, but I know that last year there was a proposal around special education. And I think there are some incremental things that could be done to alleviate some of the pressure on the smaller schools. As I shared a little bit earlier with Senator Friesen, that when you have a child with complex needs, it just, and we all know some of the chief financial officers kind of have a term for, you know, the special education increases. It's a little off color, so I'm not going to say it at the table, but I could tell you offside. And so I think that, and same with English language learners, you know, it's not disrespectful to students receiving special education services. It's just a financial term that I don't feel is appropriate for the table. So.
And I do know, like when the federal government tells you they're going to give you a special amount and then you don't get it, and then you fall back on, well, who's going to take care of these children? And trust me, in my neck of the woods, it's a big issue. So how do we, I mean, there's not a magic bullet here that's going to take care of every area of this, but financially, you would benefit greatly if this did go through, correct? The numbers?
We don't see it that way. We are trying to understand that, that the money has to come from somewhere, right? And so, and trying to be thoughtful about the fact that it has to come from somewhere, so.
And knowing that you are trying to live within your means as you are doing today. So this changes and everybody gets a little bit more or a little bit less. Again, I mean, I felt like a few years ago, we had a really nice deal going and it just blew up. I mean, it takes a lot. Anybody in this room, those two gentlemen behind you that put this energy and effort into this, you're not going to please everyone, and we're not going to please everyone. But together, we have to figure out what that is that will make a difference for both sides. So I just know that, hey, this is a great start, but we've got a ways to go just to be sure that all children are taken care of. And you know what? My biggest thing is the education side of it. You know, we can build the big marble buildings, but if that child is at a 50% level at reading or math, give me the 5 core subjects and I take every mandate away from you that we've ever asked you to do. Because it's all the things that we keep putting on the school systems that makes a difference in what these numbers need to be.
Thank you,
So,
Senator.
thank you.
Thank
Sorry.
you. No, it's
editorializing.
okay. Any other questions?
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you.
I have one. You mentioned it in your testimony, and I agree with you because I remember last year it came up on the floor during one of the fix-it bills, systematically on the learning community. Can you repeat what you said? Systematically
Kind of dismantling.
So what does this bill do that, I mean, I understand I agree with you on that. So what is this bill doing that furthers the dismantling? Because I have not caught that.
Well, we see it where in the funding mechanism that would diminish down for the learning communities of Douglas and Sarpy.
So it would take away from our state funding the learning community or take away from their levy authority?
I believe it's the state funding, but I'll have to check that back.
Or maybe you're concerned that will ultimately
Yes,
come
yeah.
away. Okay. Okay. I appreciate that. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here.
I appreciate it.
Other opponents? Good afternoon, I'm sorry. How are you
You're fine.
today?
You're fine. Good afternoon, Chairman Linehan, members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Monty Stoddard, MONTY STODDARD. I'm a landowner and rancher from Harrisburg, Nebraska. Third term county treasurer in Banner County, Nebraska, and I serve as the chairman of the Nebraska Cattlemen Taxation Committee. And I'm here today to share the perspective of Nebraska cattlemen, Nebraska Farm Bureau, Nebraska Corn Growers Association, Nebraska State Dairy Association, Nebraska Soybean Association, Nebraska Pork Producers Association, and the Nebraska Wheat Growers Association regarding LB 891. As you've heard from our organizations repeatedly, property tax relief and reform are of the utmost importance to our members. I want to acknowledge the work this committee has completed to deliver property tax relief to all Nebraska taxpayers via property tax credit refund and the Nebraska Property Tax Incentive Act, LB 1107. On the surface, these bills claim to deliver property tax relief when fully implemented. Unfortunately, these fall short of delivering the equal amounts of property tax relief delivered by the Nebraska Property Tax Incentive Act, LB 1107. Estimated total TIOSA aid for 2022-2023 is $1.07 billion. Of this amount, 93% would be distributed to 86 equalized districts, while 158 non-equalized districts will share the remaining 7%. Our analysis of this proposal estimates approximately 80% of the new dollars would be distributed to the 86 currently equalized schools. Well, better than the current distribution, it appears that distribution of state aid would remain unproportionately weighted to schools which already received the bulk of the state aid. Essentially, this proposal would require agricultural landowners to effectively trade the current level of relief via LD 1107 credits from 29% down to 19% of total property taxes paid to schools. This trade-off comes at a double disadvantage, as I stated earlier. A higher percentage will remain with equalized schools who already receive a higher percentage of state aid. Our organizations are committed to continued conversations with senators as property tax relief and reform mechanisms are drafted. That said, until an alternative method of property tax reform can be achieved, we are committed to protecting the Property Tax Incentive Act credits. We believe this fund must be maintained until an agreed upon path forward is drafted and agricultural landowners receive a proportionate percentage of relief as the Nebraska Property Tax Incentive Act currently provides. For these reasons, we are opposed to LB 891. We thank you for your time, and I will be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much for being here. Are there questions from the committee? So you're here for everybody?
Yeah,
In
pretty
ag.
much. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, I do appreciate that you all came in.
Right.
I wondered
You're
where you all were.
Okay. Well, we appreciate the work that you've all done, and we hope to keep a seat at the table and move forward.
Yes, I see you. I'm waving at Bruce. Okay, no questions, and thank you very much for being here.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.
Thank you.
Other opponents?
Madam Chairman, good afternoon. For the record, my name is John Hansen, John Hansen, Hansen. I'm the president of Nebraska Farmers Union, and I'm also their lobbyist. So while we support a lot of the efforts that were made relative to LB 890, as we said yesterday in the Education Committee, we couldn't get to support because we had some very substantial qualms about how it is that it got funded and how ag ends up at the end of the day. And I think the Ag Leaders Group did a good job of describing our heartburn on it. I would just note that I think that there is an interesting triangulation based on my years of doing this, that we finally have a bill that Omaha Public Schools, Farm Bureau, and Farmers Union all agree on. So that in itself, I would say, is a significant effort to get all of that done. and all, I suspect, maybe for somewhat different reasons. But relative to the sustainability, if we're going to do something as dramatic as what 890 proposes to do, I really do think we have to have a sustainable revenue source. And to that end, I think that we have to take a hard look at modernizing our state tax system, and we would be more comfortable if we had done something similar to the bills that Senator Breezy brought on behalf of the Nebraskans United Coalition, where you actually modernize the state sales taxes, you look at exemptions, you do all of those things in terms of what is sustainable over the longer term, and that we would feel better. We raised some issues yesterday relative to the allocated income tax fund, which, as I discussed yesterday, when we started out with 1059, and I was here when we started out with 1059, we were at 20%. Now we're down to 2.23%. But one of the things that we also found out as we were working together with the other groups in the Nebraskans United Coalition is that when you plug in the 20%, it didn't work quite as well as we thought it was going to work when you looked at all of the actual districts. And so as you're doing tax policy, if I've learned anything, which some folks would say would probably be a miracle, but is that you really can't make good tax policy based on philosophy. You have to look at the numbers and see how the numbers actually work, because it's a very complicated economic landscape. And so my advice is always for folks is to do the numbers, and then based on how the numbers actually work as best you can tell in the real world, then develop a philosophy that is consistent with what the numbers show. Because if you're just doing philosophy, you're likely to come up short and or be badly surprised by how it actually works. So that is, I guess, of the things that we would offer on 891 is that we think that there's some things that could be done. We think that there's some changes that could be made. But if we look at it as is, are we comfortable with it? And the answer would be no, we're not, and we can't get to the point that we would support it as is, that's for sure. And so with that, I would thank you for your time and thank you for your efforts in this never-ending search for the Holy Grail or the more fair and balanced way to pay for K-12 education. Thank you very much, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Other questions from the committee? Senator Boster.
Thank you, Chairman Hand. Thank you, Mr. Hanson, for your testimony. You talked about your objections are related to the funding provisions in this, and that you'd like to see a modernization of our tax structure to include a broadening of the base. We certainly had a lot of conversations about that in this committee. And just for clarity, well, my understanding of going through some of that in order to receive significant revenues from base broadening activity, you would have to take on a couple of things. Perhaps the taxation of unprepared food, medical services, prescription drugs. Is that essentially what you're recommending?
I don't remember having those things included in our list of things that we looked at relative to our recommendations.
And I don't know exactly what your recommendations were.
And I can go back and I can revisit, and I'll be glad to send you kind of the cheat sheet and the summary of what was in and what was not in the proposals that the larger group put together.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Boster, other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Other opponents? Are there any other opponents? Neutral position.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Linehan, members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Tiffany Friesen Malone, TIFFANY-FRIESEN-MILONE. I'm Editorial Director at Open Sky Policy Institute. We're here to testify in a neutral capacity on LB 891. We appreciate the influx of funds that it would provide to schools, but would include a new revenue source. To start, we support eliminating the refundable income tax credit created by 1107 and directing those funds towards schools directly. Increasing state support to schools was recommended by the 2013 Tax Modernization Committee report as the best way to alleviate our state's heavy reliance on property taxes. Reallocating the $548 million currently going towards these credits to schools would move our national ranking much closer to the middle than where we are now at 49th as a percentage of state support going to public K through 12 schools. Pushing this level of funding towards schools would help address our heavy reliance on property taxes by lowering levies an average of 21 cents in the second year, according to the Department of Education. Only 6 schools wouldn't see a change in their levies. This would have positive impacts on property owners. For example, someone who owns a median valued home in Norfolk pays $1,464 in property taxes under their current dollar levy and receives $366 back through the 1107 credit. Under LB 981, however, the general fund levy would drop to just under 60 cents, resulting in an additional $277 in property tax savings over what they're currently receiving under LB 1107. York also fares better under this plan. A homeowner there with a median valued home pays $1,356 in property taxes under their roughly dollar levy and receives $339 back through the 1107 credit. Under this bill, the general fund levy would drop to about 56 cents, resulting in an additional $230 in savings. We're in unusual circumstances with an unprecedented level of federal funds coming in, contributing to a considerable surplus. Nebraska's economy is currently propped up by $21 billion from the federal government, which is about twice our total annual state and local tax collections. This aid, combined with other factors, leads some experts to believe that we are in a fiscal bubble, including Lucy Dadian, a senior research associate with the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center at the Urban Institute. Open Sky has long advocated for more funding for schools in order to lower property taxes and achieve better balance. By directing the current surplus towards state aid to schools, the legislature will be making an important investment in Nebraska's economy and its workforce, something that it cannot achieve through tax cuts that benefit the wealthy rather than low and middle income families. However, we remain concerned about the long-term sustainability of this plan since it does not have a new revenue source. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions from the committee? So you mentioned Norfolk and York, I think.
Yes.
Did you have examples for Hampton or Giltner?
I don't think they were on our list. We kind of started picking schools and just going because we were running out of time.
Any schools that are NERCSA schools?
I don't know which are all NERCSA schools. I'll list the ones that I have examples for. We have done Boone, Lexington, Omaha, Grand Island,
Boone.
Aurora.
Boone.
So Boone, the difference in their tax savings, we have their tax savings at $83, and under the 1107 credit, they're at $141.
So they
So they
lose.
would be one who would lose.
So, okay, go on. Boone.
Yeah. So Boone, Grand Island, Aurora, Lincoln, Nebraska City, Columbus, Wayne, Wheeler, and York. Of the ones that
Wheeler.
we did, there were 3 that were better under 1107. Wheeler was one, and it's a difference. Yeah.
And what was the other one?
The other one, I have Aurora. It's pretty close though.
What happens in Aurora?
It looks like a difference of $260 in tax savings under this, whereas at the median home value, it'd be $322. So this
Aurora's-
is all at median home value.
Right, well, that's a good place to be.
Yes.
Okay, so Aurora's NERCSA, not NERCSA, Stance, right? Stance. Okay. Other questions from the committee? Thank you very much for being here. Thanks.
Chairwoman Linehan, members of the committee.
My name is Robert J. Hallstrom, Hallstrom. I appear before you today as registered lobbyist for the Nebraska Bankers Association to testify in a neutral capacity on LB 891. We bring a little different perspective today and have an opportunity to get into the weeds on the bill, I guess. The interest of the NBA stems from the provisions of LB 891, which would reduce the maximum levy for all special building fund purposes from 14 cents to 10 cents. School districts are authorized to enter into 7-year lease purchase agreements for special building projects. Banks provide lease purchase financing for these transactions with revenues derived from the 14-cent levy authority under Section 79-10-120 used to satisfy the school district's payment obligations. Reducing this levy authority in midstream for lease purchase financing arrangements already in place may constitute an impairment of contracts. When similar provisions were proposed under LB 974 during the 2020 legislative session, the NBA worked with Senator Linehan and Revenue Committee counsel to craft an amendment to allow the 14-cent levy authority to be extended for the duration of existing lease purchase financing transactions. We believe the similar amendment to LB 891 would be appropriate. Senator Breezy may recall that the LB 974 issue arose from a school district in his legislative district at that time. In visiting with bond counsel on this issue, it was noted that potential impairment of contract issues could also be raised by the changes proposed on page 46, line 9, and page 49, lines 25 and 26. In both instances, authority to exceed the maximum levy authority in response to decreased property valuations would be eliminated, which would adversely impact existing school district bond obligations. So I bring those issues to the attention, be happy to work with the committee for potential changes.
I get the first one. I didn't get the second one. What's the second one?
Second one, there's two issues where I think there's a 3 and a 5 cent levy authority under Chapter 79-10-106. I believe I might have that statute incorrect, but it's on pages 46, line 9, and page 49, lines 25 and 26. The current law, as I understand it, allows for the levy to be exceeded if there is a reduction in property valuations. And bonds have been issued on the faith of being able to do that as part of the revenue raising repayment source, and this would eliminate that authority.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions from the committee? So, Mr. Hallstrom, you're telling me that we have a bill in front of us to spend $714 million, and this is what the bankers are worried about.
It's just an issue. I told you I wouldn't get involved in the issues that are underlying. There's major issues there of substance. This is one just to make sure that we don't have legal issues that can be raised on existing lease purchase financing transactions.
All right, any other questions? Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Are there any other testimony in the neutral position? Okay, then we have no letters for the record. Senator Lindstrom, would you like to close?
Thank you. Well, again, you probably heard a lot about this yesterday, so I appreciate you indulging me on this side of things. I guess three things that kind of the theme of the day, as I heard it, was trust, fairness, and the future. One of the things that we, on the trust side, and I get your point on how do we trust the school districts from not engaging in raising the property tax back up to cover the cost. I think we've covered that in some of the tax asking equations that Chip and others pointed out. From the education side, the trust and what we try to do, and I've sat here where is the money always going to be there? We tried to address that with the trust fund and providing that mechanism that will have those dollars there near or into the future. Yesterday, I did hear Dr. Logan talk about the economic cycles and will the legislature uphold their end of the bargain. I've haven't met too many senators that don't care about K through 12 education and kids. And it would be very, very unlikely that wouldn't be at the top of the list for us to fund. But again, that's why we have the mechanism with the trust fund itself. Fairness, this is obviously an extremely complicated equation situation. Not only are we dealing with 244 school districts, we're dealing with the outmigration of population, headcount dropping. How do we successfully educate our kids throughout the state? But the way as I see it, when it comes down to the fairness issue, 244 school districts and the vast majority, 2/3 not getting equalization aid. Through this proposal, to the extent that we can in the short term, we get there, we get close. So as we talked about the discussion on the 20%, we'll certainly run those models if we can get a little bit closer. And going back to my opening statements, this is not a one and done scenario or situation. We didn't think that we would come in and have all the answers. I don't think anybody does. But I believe it sets the foundation to try to strive to that 50-50 model. If we can close the gap between what the ag property taxpayers are paying and what they're getting in reduction. Again, I want to make sure that I'm not discounting what Senator Breezy's worked on. There are a lot of ifs in a legislative session. We still are working through some of these bills. We're working through the budget. But unless we bring these proposals out here to have the discussion, and whether or not my bill fails, other tax bills fail, you never know. Some of these things can get worked out. Maybe we have some of these options on the table, and without having these discussions, we can't go forward with that. Again, the future, as I look at it, we're dealing with themes and problems, not only in the state of Nebraska, in every committee, and whether it is, again, out-migration and dealing with the redistricting that we dealt with. And of course, with these tax proposals, when you have District 36 moving to Sarpy County, a significant number of senators now reside in those population areas that can kill a lot of bills. So when we talk about even rural broadband and opportunities for kids in education, with this proposal taking the 60% to 100% in the preschool arena for childcare, closing the gap for the 2-household family that the mom and dads have to work, the workforce. These issues, there are not as many opportunities from a curriculum standpoint in some of the rural school districts where kids can even apply to certain scholarships, even in our state colleges and universities, talking to parents. And so if we're not working, going back to the fairness issue and creating this funding mechanism that provides equalization to all school districts, I don't know how we can ask ourselves how to grow Nebraska or continue to help rural Nebraska grow. And so it isn't that I'm trying to take away any type of property tax reduction through the income credit. It is just providing the fairness on who gets the vast majority and who doesn't. And like I said, 2/3 don't get anything. And in this proposal, everyone gets, to the extent that we can, something. Again, not perfect. As we look in comparison to other states, currently we're at 12%. Thereabouts. If we do this in year 2, we're getting closer to the lower 20%. We're about average in the Plains region. So these are the things that we, again, as we look to the future, what are we striving to get at and what are we trying to do? And even the tax proposal, as I mentioned in my opening, I just see that as fitting, as it complements the overall theme of what we're trying to do. Even with Senator Erdman's proposal, even as that goes, if the idea is to move more towards individuals in the state of Nebraska saying yes or no to a product in the tune of sales tax and being less penalizing on the income tax, property tax side, this again fits into that idea. And we have great ideas that come out, but again, it's 33 votes. And we could talk about these things all day, but unless it passes and unless we affect change and find the 33, it doesn't matter. So this is, to me, when we've had these discussions and why I was interested in this bill was because I think that this is as closest that I've seen since I've been down here to getting that 33 that comes back to building trust, creating fairness, and looking towards the future of where we go in the broader spectrum and broader idea of where we can position ourselves as a state to ultimately be competitive. And so I'll wrap it up there and I'll be happy to answer any final questions that you may have.
Thank you, Senator Lindstrom. Are there questions from the committee? Seeing none?
Thank you for your
very
time.
much.
Thanks to everybody who came.
And I would ask if the revenue committee could just hang back for 10 minutes. We're not going to exec. I just want to talk about when we might exec. So
You gotta get out of
Martha,
here.
you're here, so we're not executing.